Well, I have one sibling, my brother Damien. He's 18 months older than me. And from the time I appeared in his world, he made it his mission to traumatize me. So he'd find big black rubber spiders and put them down my bed because he loved to hear me scream. And then he had Matchbox toy cars, and he'd line them up in a row and pretend they were at the beginning of the Grand Prix. And he'd rev their engines all day, and we shared a room together. So every morning I'd wake up with brum, 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 right by my face every single day. And then I had a teddy bear that I absolutely adored. Her name was Teresa. And I walked into our room one day, and there she was, hanging from a light fixture, with a noose around her neck, and a sign on her stomach that said, "I can't take it anymore." He was a pest. He was an absolute pest. And I adored him. And so did my parents. He was the golden boy who could do no wrong. Until he started limping, and limping really badly. Now, my brother had been born with spina bifida. He'd had an operation, but there were no other symptoms. But every year, the specialist would phone up my mother to see if he'd developed any problems walking. Well, this limping was really bad. It had come on overnight, but it was really bad, so my mother phoned the specialist, and he said, "Mrs. Buckley, bring him in. We need to do tests tomorrow." So my mother bundled us up the next day. We said goodbye to my father. We had a hotel and restaurant called the Stuart in the north of England, and the restaurant was booming, so he had to stay behind. But I remember holding onto my mother's hand and walking through the long, cold corridors of the hospital that smelt of disinfectant and stewing cabbage and loneliness. And Damien was just a few steps ahead. Well, he was about 5 or 6 or so at the time, and he'd always been a really energetic, annoying little boy. But he was bent over, and he was limping, and he was dragging one leg as though it was very difficult to get it off the floor. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Well, as soon as the specialist saw this, he said, "Mrs. Buckley, we're going to have to test him today. You have to leave him in." Well, that night was the first time I'd ever been in our bedroom alone. Now, I did not miss the revving engines, but I did miss my brother. And my mother said, "Don't worry, darling, don't worry. He'll be back soon." And he was. He was back in a few days, but he was still limping. Now, my great Aunt Eileen, my mother's aunt, my mother's very elderly aunt, lived with us. She was in charge of the stockroom, making sure that none of the restaurant supplies ended up on the black market. It happened often. And my mother went to talk to her. She said, "Aunt Eileen," she said, it's not spina bifida, but the doctors doing tests, they think it's polio. Now, this was 2 years before the vaccine was brought into England that virtually wiped out the disease. And in the years before, there'd been 5 polio epidemics. Many people had died, particularly children. And if they survived, often they had great problems walking, having to wear calipers or be in wheelchairs. And they developed problems breathing. They had to be in machines that encased them. So little children were in these machines with only their heads sticking out. And they'd have to be in there for days or weeks or sometimes years. They were called iron lungs. Well, the mood in the Stuart was so gloomy that week. My mother, a good Irish Catholic woman, she was praying to St. Jude all week, the patron saint of hopeless cases. But finally, the next week, Dr. Lahan, he came and he was a family friend. And he said, "Valerie," he said, "the results have come back and it's not polio. But we are so concerned, especially the specialist, because of that limping. I need to see him again." So my mother nodded at him, and Damien set off across the room. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Dr. Lahan said, "Look, Valerie, I'm so sorry. I have to treat this as though it is polio." He said, "So I'm going to come back in a week, and if that limp is not gone, I have to put the steward into quarantine." My mother said, "No." She said, "You mean close it down?" And he said, "I'm so sorry, Valerie. I don't have any other alternative." Well, even though I was young, I knew this was serious. This was our business. This was our livelihood. It was the only place I'd ever known. Well, there was gloom over the whole place that week. My father was banging pans. My great-aunt Eileen, you could tell she was worried. They were all worried. I was worried. And then Dr. Lahan came back, and he saw Damien was still limping, and he said, Valerie, I'm so sorry. I have to put in the order for quarantine this afternoon. The place will be shut down tomorrow. Well, at that moment, the living room door opened, and my great-aunt Eileen came in. Now, she was leaning heavily on a walking stick. She was wearing big brown men's slippers because her feet were very misshapen. She couldn't wear ordinary shoes. She had a really bad case of rheumatoid arthritis and had difficulty walking. But she set her sights on her favorite chair. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. And Damien got up, got right behind her like a little shadow, bent over. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. Shuffle, shuffle, drag. He was imitating my great aunt. Dr. Lahan said, I don't believe it, unless I'd seen it with my own eyes. He's imitating Aunt Eileen. My mother said, you mean he doesn't have polio? And he said, Dr. Lahan said, no. He said, the tests were negative, and now I see where you got the limp from. So my mother said, come over here, Damien, not like Aunt Eileen, like a little boy, but he's Damien. He's not capable of being a little boy. He prance over there like a pony. Well, I thought they should have killed him, but did they? Oh, no, he's the favoured golden boy. No, they all loved on him. Well, over the years, it turns out that Damien is a very gifted mimic. I've lived in all these places, and often I've had phone calls that I thought were from a South African lawyer offering me a fabulous job, a Pakistani professor giving me exam results, a police official telling me I had so many parking fines I was going to be incarcerated. And it was only at the end I realised it was Damien. It was Damien, and he's done other dreadful things, and I have been filled often with righteous, truly righteous indignation. But even at his worst, I am so grateful that the polio didn't take him, and that I still have a pesky, pesky brother. Thank you. Thank you very much.